Hi guys, welcome back to another tutorial of complete .NET Web APIs. So today what I'll be covering up is basically creating the structure of the project, and we'll be following an architecture called as a clean architecture. Before beginning, let me just show you what the clean architecture is all about. So if you see, we were used to using this kind of architecture, which was called the N-tier architecture or N-layer architecture, where we used to build the UI as one layer, then the middle layer called the business layer, and then the data access layer, which would contain the repositories, unit of work, etc., which would then finally talk to the database. Now, slightly different from this, the clean architecture, which is also called as a hexagonal architecture or onion architecture, or also ports and adapters architecture. So it looks something like this, wherein in the center, there is a domain layer, which is actually the business domain of whichever client you are building the application for. Outside that is the application layer. So if you see, the domain layer is not referencing any other layers. The application layer references the domain layer, and then the outer layers are the presentation layer and the infrastructure layer. So presentation layer is the layer where your controllers, may it be your web API controllers or may it be your MVC web application controllers, will sit. Basically any presentation logic which the user sees. And the infrastructure layer will contain all infrastructure related logic, like your repository concretions, concrete repositories, concrete unit of work. Then also whatever logic which deals with the system infrastructure, like in case if you are calling third-party web APIs, that logic will also reside in the infrastructure layer. So this can also be realized as this. So there's a domain, application, then presentation, infrastructure, and infrastructure deals with the database, that is the core systems layer. So basically just an in-depth of what can reside in each layers. Okay, we'll cover up these concepts in the upcoming tutorials. It is also called as a hexagonal architecture. Okay, so if you see the structure, so there's domain layer, which is independent, which is the core business logic. Adopting to this kind of architecture basically helps you in separation of concerns, where each layer is concerned about its own functionality. Okay, so then there's application layer, which will reference the domain layer, and then infrastructure and presentation layers will reference the application layer. We'll also see that presentation layer, though it is not directly linked to the infrastructure layer, will reference the infrastructure layer. That is just for dependency injections. So as we start developing it, we'll understand. Yeah, so that's the basic overview on clean architecture. So let's get back to Visual Studio and start from where we had left in the last tutorial. So in the last tutorial, we created the controller, company's controller. I had just created one project, and even the model I had put it in the controller class. So now let's start creating the structure. So the way I like to structure my project is basically creating two solution folders to start with. We say add a new solution folder. I call it source, where your source code lies, and another folder for tests. So tests. So this is where all your tests will lie, the unit tests, functional tests, architectural tests, or other kinds of integration tests. Okay, So we'll do that in upcoming courses. Okay. So now inside the source, let me first go ahead and create the domain layer, which is a class library. So let's add a new project, uh, class library, which is .NET or .NET Standard. So I preferably name the projects as the name of the project dot the layer. So in this case, I'm creating the domain. So I'll name it as organization dot domain. And yes, it's .NET 7. So we go ahead and create that. Let's delete this class for now. And then the next thing what I do is inside the domain, I always like to create this folder called common. I'll show you what we use it for, common. Okay. Inside that, I usually create two more folders. One is models, and the other one is just for common utilities. So this will basically contain any utility classes like extension methods or any other static utilities which you have in your project, which is common to all the layers. So that's why it's placed in common. And after that, what I do is I like to create uh, folders for individual entities. So the entity we have currently used is company. So let me create a folder for company. So why I follow the structure, I'll explain it to you guys when we go deeper into the tutorial series where we introduce concepts like uh, value objects, domain-driven models, etc. Okay, so I create a folder called company. Inside that, I will create another folder called models. Okay, and now inside this model, so we'll create the company class here. So I will add a new class. I'll name it as company, and we'll move the code for this company in that model. Company.cs. What I will do is I'll just go here and stuff this from here. And this, as soon as I cut it, this will start complaining because we need to reference it. We'll do that in just a bit. Okay, so we have this company model here. So now that we have created the organization domain layer, so the next is the next one which I'm going to create is application. So before that, I also like to structure it in this way. I'll create another structuring. So I'll add a folder inside this. I will name this as core. So this is where the core logic will reside. And I'll also create another folder called external. So what I do is I basically place my uh, domain and application layers inside the core folder, and the infrastructure and the presentation layer inside the external folder. So what I'll do is I will move this web API project, which is there inside the external folder. Okay. And also, what I'll do is I'll rename this instead of web, I'll make it as presentation. So that's how I like to name it. And also I will rename this namespace. Okay. So in external, we have presentation, and in core, we have domain. And let me add the application layer now. The project class library organization dot application and dot next 7. I'll delete this class here. Now, again, in the application layer as well, I'll show you the folder structure, which I normally go ahead and create. So inside application, again, I'll create a common folder. Name it as common. And inside the common folder in application layer, I usually have utilities, which is again for any extension method, the utility which we will be creating, and also a folder for abstractions. I'll call it as interfaces. So any interfaces which are associated with the entire application will go in this application layer, and the concretions will follow up in the infrastructure layer. Okay, now inside interfaces, basically what I'll create is a folder called persistence. So this will be the place where the interfaces for repositories will be created, because repositories are something which calls or which are communicating with the database, which is persistence of data. That's why I've named it as persistence. Okay. So after creation of the application layer, let's move and create the infrastructure layer project. I'll create another project here, another class library, which I'll call as organization dot infrastructure. Okay, so we have our infrastructure there ready. Okay. Yeah, so here what I would do is I would create a folder called persistence. So as I showed you previously, all the concretion, the concrete classes related to database or repository will go here, whereas the abstractions or interfaces will go here. Okay. One more thing which I like to do is have a folder called configurations in my application infrastructure as well as presentation layer. So let me go ahead and do that. I'll show you why I do that in a bit. Configuration. And let me do the same thing for the infrastructure layer. Configuration. And we'll keep it for the presentation layer as well. Okay. So now that we have created all the layers which we need, what we'll do is we'll try to link it or reference it. Okay. So let's try and so as you've seen in the figure, domain layer does not have any references. Application layer will reference the domain. So what I'll do is I'll go to dependencies and add a project reference for domain. Okay. Then what I'll do is now the infrastructure layer will be depending on the application layer. Okay, so it will depend on the domain layer via the application layer. And now the presentation layer, as I told you earlier, will reference the infrastructure layer and will reference the application layer via the infrastructure layer. So this is basically to take care of any dependency injections we have to do, which are associated to repositories or unit of work, etc. So for that, so what we will do is add a project reference to infrastructure. Okay. So now we almost have everything ready. So only thing we need to change is here. So let's try and build it up. Let's clean and build the project and see if anything is failing. Okay, so if you see, as soon as I added the reference, it automatically referenced it. So now let's build the project. And the build succeeded. Let's try to run it and check if everything is working as expected. We haven't changed anything in the controller. Here we are. The Swagger page is loaded. And yes, it looks as it was previously. Let's try to fire the get companies endpoint, and we are getting the companies as we have specified. Okay. Now, one more thing which I would like to cover up in this session is about the configuration folder which I create. Okay, so what I'll be doing is, so if you see the program.cs file, so basically as your project expands and becomes bigger and bigger and you include more modules, what will happen is you'll have to introduce dependency injection, and there'll be a lot of modules which would need dependency injection, which needs to be configured and registered. And if you just have one place to have all those, then this program.cs file will grow very lengthy. So what I like to follow is to divide, or again use separation of concerns, and do the dependency injection for each layer inside the own inside its own configuration folder. So if you see, let me do it for the application layer first. So what I do is I'll create a class called dependency injection. Okay, I'll name it as dependency injection, and let's make it a static class. Let's make it public static dependency injection. Now, if you see the program.cs, so we have builder.services, right? If you see, the services is of type iService collection. So what I'll do is I'll create an extension method on iService collection with public static iService collection. Service collection. Okay, and if you see, it's missing a reference. So let's try to see why it's complaining about that. Yeah, so we need to install this NuGet package in order to do this. That is Microsoft Extensions Dependency Injection.abstraction. Let's install with NuGet Package Manager. So if we go here, so I'll just select this, see the latest one which is available, and install it. So once this is installed, I've just installed it in the application viewer. So if I check my dependencies, and that is there. So as soon as I install that, what I can do now is I'll need to use this, and let's create our extension method. I'll call it, since this is an application layer, I'll call it add application. This service collection services. Okay. Return services. So if there is any dependency injection or any registration which is gated will happen here. The same way, what we do is we'll create the dependency injection class for the infrastructure layer as well as a presentation layer. So add class dependency injection. And so let me just paste it here. Okay, so I've called this as add infrastructure. And the same way we can create it for the presentation layer as well. Inside configuration, add a class dependency injection. There's a mistake in here, so we just rename it. Yeah. Okay, and I'll name this as presentation. So let's create this class here. Okay. So we are good here. So we have created the dependency injection class in all the three applications, in all the three layers, the presentation, infrastructure, and application. And the reason I'm calling the classes as dependency injection, the same class name, that also we'll cover up in the later tutorials, wherein later on I will completely use reflections and try to register these layers. Okay. So now what we will do is uh, all these services which are registered here in the program.cs. So these are basically related to the presentation layer. So we'll put these in the presentation layer. Okay. So we'll remove these from program.cs and put it in the presentation layer dependency injection file. So we just put it here, paste it here. And now instead of this, we use this services. Okay, and now here in the program.cs, what we can do is we can just say recommend register services and all the layers. Okay, and I just have to say builder dot services dot add application, the one which we have created. We just need to use the application layer one, and we can just use the dot notation and include all, add presentation, since this is the extension method which we have created, and add infrastructure. Okay, so this way, uh, even if your project grows bigger and you have a lot of dependency injection in each layers, the program.cs file, there won't be any changes. It would remain as it is because we'll be doing individual layer in dependency injections or registrations in each of their file, as we have done it for this for presentation. Okay, so now let's run our code once again and see if we have broken anything or it's working as expected. Let's run it again. We see the Swagger page, that means everything is working fine. We run the endpoint, and yes. So that was all about this tutorial of just organizing your code into a proper structure so that now you can start working on your real logic. Okay. So in the next tutorial, what we'll be doing is we'll be covering up building the database structure for the tutorial project. Okay. So until then, see you.